Today, I have the privilege of chatting to my very good friend, Sandy Bayne, who I've known for many years. Sandy's flown for many of those years and he's risen to the top of management levels in 2 different airlines. And today we're going to talk a little bit about that. So Sandy, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. What actually got you interested in flying in the first place? Because you'd been to university first, hadn't you?
Well, actually, I went to university really because of my interest in flying. My father was with 24 Squadron in World War II, and he didn't continue after flying after World War II, but was still besotted with it. I think he regrets not continuing, with an aviation career. And so I grew up at air shows, and a lot of his pals were aviation people. And so I was just loved it from day one. And when I finished school, I said, right now, I'd like to give South African Air Force selection a shot. And he said, nah, boy, you get a degree first. You're below 21, you do what I tell you to do. And so I went to Wits, I did a BCom, and he thought I was then going to carry on and do an LLB. But when I finished the BCom, I went and said, I was still under 21. I then said, okay, I want to go for the selection. I've done my bit. I've done your bit. Now I want to do my bit. And that's what happened.
And have you enjoyed the flying over all the years?
Terry, I've known you forever. You're a guy who's loved your flying career. I know that, and been very involved in it. I've loved it just as much as you. It's been a very rewarding career and something I can look back on with absolute joy. It's given me a lot in life.
So Sandy, you actually have done all this flying and then you got involved in management, worked your way up. I know you've been involved in human factors, crew resource management. You went tech captain, director flight ops, and then here in your current company of Global, you're now the chief operating officer. What encouraged you to make that swing from being a line pilot to getting involved in management?
Yeah, it's a good question, Terry, because it was never my life plan. I didn't have this all laid out. I was quite happy in the Air Force, as a line pilot in the Air Force.
Weren't we all?
Yeah, it was a great life. Yeah. But things changed, and I think the Air Force, by the early 90s, late 80s, flying was going down, and you ended up doing a number of what we saw as pointless jobs in an office back then. And I think everybody started thinking, okay, the only future is in commercial aviation. So I got my licenses, got into the airlines in 89, 90. And I was a very happy line pilot, the happiest first officer. In fact, probably the happiest, most enjoyable commercial flying part of my career was as a first officer on the Boeing 747-400. It was phenomenal.
It was wonderful, wasn't it?
It was great. Yeah. But I'm not a trust fund kid, and I'm not going to inherit anything. I'm not pleading poverty here. But my flying career was my primary source of remuneration. And I just thought to myself, I would like to have input into how I earn my money. I don't want to be just a passive receiver of rules that are made by somebody else for me to follow. And that was my brain. That's how my brain worked. And I was asked to get involved with CRM at SAA as a first officer, myself and a good friend of mine called Mike Finch. We were the first officers. And having got involved as a facilitator there, I then started studying again because I thought I didn't know enough. So I then did a BA honors in psychology. And I ended up sort of running by default a new department at SAA for CRM. I took over from a lovely man called Rob Horn. I'm sure you remember him.
I do, yeah.
And another lovely man called, who was at the time the head of training, was a guy called Mike Waite. And he took me under his wing, and he came to me and said, Sandy, I'd like to take you to take over from me as the chief standards pilot at the conclusion of, when he stepped down. Unfortunately, he ended up quite ill, and I took over sooner. And from then, I ended up as the chief pilot at SAA. And then I ended up as the director of flight operations at SAA. And every position I found rewarding. And I'd like to say it was a life plan, but it wasn't. It just seemed
It just happened.
it happened, yeah. But Terry, I was equipped. Without trying to sound stupid, I did have the tertiary qualifications for it, and I think that's important.
So I think that's really the focus of what I'd like to talk about today, or like your input on. There are a lot of people who have that interest in flying, but have a broader interest. They'd like to not necessarily sit in a cockpit for the rest of their lives. There's some people like myself who only want to sit in the cockpit and never do any proper work. Is that a good word for it? But
yeah, but you had a diverse career though, because if you focus purely on commercial aviation for a big airline, particularly long range or something, the actual flying bit of it becomes a smaller and smaller part, and you're actually becoming a manager. You're managing an operation. Whereas you always kept a huge interest in flying smaller aircraft, flying helicopters, and you kept your hand in. I always kept flying smaller aeroplanes as well, and
just because of your love of flying.
Yes, and I had ownership of smaller aeroplanes, and I'm still doing that today. So I think that love of flying never went away. It just went to a different part. I'm not trying to denigrate commercial flying, because it's also very, very challenging and great fun.
And it suits some people.
Yes, absolutely.
So the thing that I'd really like to focus on and get your opinion on. So you have these people that love flying, but would like to do other things in the flying business, such as managing. So you had tertiary education and you later did an honors degree. But for a youngster starting in flying now, it's a long process. It's not you're going to go into management in your second or third year of flying. So what would you encourage them to do? Or what skills should they acquire that would make them eligible in the later part of their career to become managers while still flying, or just managers, should that be their choice?
Yeah, Terry, I think it sounds silly, but I think the first thing you got to do is become a good pilot. You got to be a good line pilot before you anything. You got to, whether it's in the right seat or the left seat. I just feel a manager who is too theoretical, a manager who hasn't suffered with the troops in the trenches, will never make a good manager. Maybe it's an old-fashioned way of looking at it.
But that gives you the credibility.
I think so. I think to become a manager of people who are quite driven, pilots, and the other staff around that in flight operations, they have to look at you and say, yeah, I don't necessarily like him, but if he climbs out the trench and runs at the machine guns, I'll go with him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think you have to have that credibility. I think you cannot get away from the fact that you need a tertiary education, and a tertiary education that's very focused. I think you need a good background in both aviation and airline economics, which are two totally different things. I can remember when you and I were at South African Airways, we had an amazing pilots association which supported us and it was amazing. But I was on the union for quite a while, and I can remember we would always say as pilots, we need a pilot to run the airline. They're the only people who could make it work. You get a pilot to run an airline, 90% of the time you're going to end up bankrupt.
Nice new airplanes, nice.
You're going to have the best job in the world for 18 months. And that's it. So I think, and if I look at social media now, Terry, aviation-based social media, I don't participate in it, and I don't have a social media profile. I actually stalk on Facebook through my wife's profile when people tell me there's something to look at. And I sometimes look at things on social media, and it's such a good platform, and you can use it for such good. And I actually feel hurt and offended by some of the stuff that goes on there, both in terms of sometimes it seems like they're looking for somebody to blame. And then other times I look at people in there who have profiles in the industry, but you can just see through comments, the knowledge base is such that you shouldn't be commenting.
Hence your comment that you need to have credibility as one of the troops.
If you do, yeah, I agree. But and if you're a troop and you want to make comments about a general, become a general first. And if you're a general and you want to make comments about the troops, you have to have been a troop.
Absolutely.
I think that's very important.
So, which are there specific subjects or fields that would make it work that way? So, for example, you've mentioned management, you mentioned economics. What about law? Is that an important subject to study?
I did a legal BCom, yeah. I'm not sure, Terry. I think these days people are lucky in that there's quite a lot of both aviation-oriented universities in the world, Embry-Riddle, et cetera, that offer degrees that are packaged particularly for the industry.
And are they packaged for the industry in terms of management, or?
Yeah, many of them you can stream.
Yes.
So an operational manager is not necessarily a financial manager.
Yes.
And a commercial manager is not necessarily an operational manager.
Yes.
So I think initially you can do a broad spectrum, which is very good at a bachelor level. And once you start getting to an honors or master's level, you start narrowing your focus a little bit. And I do think that most pilots end up as pretty good operational managers. It's the commercial and financial side, commercial first and financial side, which often is a little lacking. And because the commercial side, in terms of airline economics, not aviation economics, is complex. It's very, very complex.
I would imagine so. There are so many factors that influence everyday operations, and it changes from day to day.
The price of one seat on one flight in one aeroplane can vary 15 times in one day.
Good grief.
That's yield and all that sort of thing, and it's very complex.
So Sandy, what I'm really trying to do here is open people's minds to what they would have to do if they wanted to progress through the process. And you've given us some really interesting comments. To be honest with you, never having been involved in that side of it, it's all...
And yet you have, because training is a route you can follow as well.
True. Absolutely.
It's not one I've followed. I think I'd make a horrendous instructor, but knowing you well, you instructed very well, and you've got a temper on you, Captain Chaplin, but you did very well. So I want to emphasize that the training side of it is also a route to follow.
And I think that if I were to tag onto that comment, there are so many different fields. You actually need to pick the one that you can't be a master of all.
Yeah.
It's not going to work.
Especially as you get to the latter end of your career.
Yes.
I'm at the latter end of my career now, and I think when you're in your 40s, you really need to be settled in your head. I want to be a line pilot, and I'm quite happy being a line pilot, which is great. I would like to go into training. By that stage, I think your choices should have been made, or I am busy with or have completed tertiary education to get me onto the other side.
So if you were to wrap it all up, what have you enjoyed about management? What don't you enjoy about management?
I enjoy seeing how the watch works when you open it. I enjoy that. I enjoy being able to make decisions or being part of a team that makes decisions that affects the way we work. I don't just want to be a user. I want to be a provider as well. And I think in the end, it's the ability to see behind the curtain. Why all the levers and cogs.
So why are they doing this? Why is this a good decision? Why is it a bad decision?
Exactly. Because it was and is my primary means of remuneration. So why not try and get to know as much as possible about it?
I want to digress very slightly, but the flying part of this revolves around keeping your license and your medical. So having a secondary stream of interest, particularly if you like aviation, staying within aviation, but not necessarily relying totally on having that license all the time. So would you encourage a youngster to get involved and start studying broader than just aviation? Because there's so much you have to study in aviation now that is pretty much a full-time job anyway. But would you encourage someone to broaden their fields early?
Yeah, which actually, sorry, another thought popped into my head. Safety is another route that can be followed. And many good friends of yours and mine who have stopped flying for whatever reason, medical, etc., have gone into that field and been very successful and are very well known. So yes, I think that is important. I mean, the ability to be able to still provide yourself and your family if you do lose that dreaded medical, which is it's a fear of ours right through our lives. I think as you get older, it becomes a bigger fear. And I think that's important. I mean, and what you said is very true. Commercial flying is so complex now. I was sitting in a meeting recently with the owner of the company, and we were in an online meeting, actually a pilot's meeting, with some information. We were chatting about flight data management and flight data analysis. And I actually said to the owner of the company, I said, we were on mute, luckily. It was a Teams meeting.
Yeah.
And I said to him, what would Ernest K. Gann say if he was sitting in this meeting?
It would be very interesting.
Would be.
Ernest K. Gann of Fate is the Hunter, the famous aviation.
So yeah, he's probably written the subliminal book on the birth of commercial aviation.
He did.
And called Fate is the Hunter. Yeah. He's written many others, but I think that's the one that stands out. And I was just sitting there thinking at my advanced age now, what would he think about this meeting?
All the sideshows and things that go on.
The manuals you have to go through. It's a hell of a career, but it's a rewarding career, and it's been very good to me and been very good to you.
So just to the final part, because I know you're a busy man, you've given me all the time I can hope for today.
No, anytime for you.
If you were, at which stage do you start diversifying and start doing this tertiary education? Do you go out of aviation and study at a university? Do you do it online? What sort of guidance would you give someone? Because they need to do their own research, obviously, but they need somewhere to start. And that's what I'm asking you. What would you do?
I think the first thing is don't depend on handouts. Don't depend on handouts. Don't depend on people saying, well, yes, I'll go and study, but are you going to pay for me? So that's the first thing. Take ownership of your qualifications, take ownership of your career. And the second thing is the sooner the better. Once you're established. So if you're feeling you're in an airline as a first officer on an aircraft and you feel settled and confident in yourself and your job, that's the time. Adult education is always difficult, and I think online is probably the way to go, so you don't have a break in your career with the problems that come with that, which are largely financial. I think online is the way to go. But studying distance learning as an adult, especially an adult with children, is difficult, and you've got to be very disciplined. Yeah.
So Sandy, thanks so much. I do hope that you will forgive us for the odd interjection with noise going past.
But it's aeroplanes.
We live next to an airport, and that's what makes it so exciting. So you certainly, I think, shed a lot of light on why you did certain things and why it would be an interesting path to follow. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Colonel. It was always nice chatting to you.